OK, well, it's the same story every weekend, isn't it now? Thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters calling for peace as they march through the streets. Over 200,000 marched this weekend, with 4 people arrested, including 1 man on suspicion of a terrorism-related offence. So, as police reveal that the cost of police in the Gaza-related protests in London have reached over £32.2 million, is it time that we now ban these demonstrations altogether? It's a tricky question. First of all, though, let's have a look at the video that's caused all the controversy this weekend. You'll probably be very annoyed.
Show off with me because I can point these people out to you. And again, I was told when I asked that a swastika was not necessarily anti-Semitic or disruptive to public worship. That doesn't seem right to me.
Everything needs to be taken in context, doesn't it?
Right, OK, well, that was, if you couldn't hear or if you're listening on the radio, it's a Metropolitan Police officer telling a Jewish woman that swastikas displayed during a pro-Palestinian march needed to be taken in context. Now, a Met Police spokesperson has said this clip is a short excerpt of what was a 10-minute conversation with an officer. During the full conversation, the officer establishes that the person was concerned about has already been arrested for a public order offence in relation to a placard. So, I mean, the statement they actually issued said this. The officer then offered to arrange for other officers to attend and accompany the woman to identify any other persons she was concerned about amongst the protests. But after returning to speak to his supervisor, she had unfortunately left. Now, I have to admit, I don't blame her. I think she was an American tourist. She happens to be Jewish. But basically, she was on holiday in London, saw a protester waving a swastika at a peace demonstration and was upset and went to ask a police officer how that was allowed. Ben, I'm going to come to you first on this one. I'm a bit shocked by this still. I've seen it several times now and I still can't get my head around what I actually heard, especially seeing as the officer concerned actually said it depends on the context in which you're waving a swastika.
Well, I mean, if it did depend on the context, you would have thought this was a perfectly good example of where the context would prohibit it. I mean, there's no civilised circle in which I move where the swastika would be justified in any context. And, in fact, people, you know, when I was a member of the Brexit Party and now that I'm a member of Reform UK, often they replace the symbol of the Brexit Party, you know, previously now Reform UK, with a swastika to indicate that, you know, we're some kind of extreme far-right party. Actually, what's interesting is that this is essentially a left-wing march, and the swastika actually is the symbol for the National Socialist Party, which was famously left-wing. And I know we're going to be talking about free speech later, but this kind of totalitarian shutdown of debate, the insistence of a particular ideology over another, it's the preserve of the left. And the left are on the they're on the march, literally, at the moment. And the fact that this police officer could have had any form of debate with this woman, it should have been taken as read that the swastika is unacceptable. I mean, for goodness sake, this is, you know, a march effectively against Jews, and she's got a swastika on.
The context wasn't difficult to understand there. Yeah. I mean, Joe, the swastika is offensive.
Yes, completely.
Certainly in those circumstances. And we have seen now so many times, so many offensive things going on these marches. Our own reporter, Catherine Forster, is now so worried about going back for her own safety to these marches, a peace march, by the way, that she's thinking twice about whether she should cover them in person. And a journalist being terrified to do her job in the streets of London. Isn't it time that we just stop these marches in particular?
Why should we stop these marches any more than stopping any other marches? If you go down that path, you're going to say, right, you can't march because they are peaceful. 4 people, you just said it, 4 people were arrested out of 200,000 people.
But maybe more should have been arrested.
Well, we don't know, Ben, because we weren't there. You could say that about any event, whether it was a pub or a party or a football match or anything. There were arrests made made. I think that police officer engaged in a perfectly polite and civilised way. The person this woman had allegedly seen had apparently been arrested, presumably one of the 4 people charged. So it's been dealt with. The fact that he engaged with her, and I read somewhere else that he'd said, you know, if you want to, and offered that somebody else, you know, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, oh, we can't have this march. I don't agree with the fact that this is a left-wing march. It is people who are appalled and horrified at what is happening to civilians in Gaza. I mean, the fact that, and I'll read you the quote from a Holocaust survivor, Stephen Kapos, who attended wearing a badge with the colours of Palestine, the Palestinian flag. And he said, we need to put pressure on our government and on the official opposition so they speak up, act, stop arming Israel and stop supporting genocide. Now, you know, he's a Holocaust survivor. He's got more right...
What did he have to say about the swastika?
Well, we don't know, Ben, because we weren't there.
I bet he would have been
Well, he might have been, but the person was arrested.
Yeah. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that there is a valid debate to be had over whether Israel's continued bombardment of Gaza is justified or not. And I think the debate does need to move on from the principle of Israel having a right to defend itself, because it seems to me that Netanyahu's own domestic position is now promoting him into keeping this war going.
Well,
and I was actually quite pleased to
absolutely.
see... I was quite pleased to see earlier the Israelis having struck a target in Syria, taking out an Iranian army officer, because I think the issue here... I'm digressing, but I'll come back to the point. The issue here is really a conflict between Iran on the one side and Saudi for hegemony over the Middle East. And the proxy battle being fought out is between Israel and Gaza.
But the problem I have with this, Ben, is that why is it being fought out on the streets of London in 2024, where we have Jewish people terrified to come into the city?
And I think that's a different debate, but one which is absolutely relevant. And the debate there, I think, is evidence of multiculturalism not working. We've taken on far too many people into this country, encouraged them to maintain their own cultures, their own language, their own way of living,
encouraged them Orthodox Jews,
encouraged them to live in silos, celebrated their positions, taken our own culture has taken the knee to it, and our culture, which Joe supports and I support, the right to protest, it's fundamentally part of British culture, is in certain cases being abused here. There are prescribed groups who are going out under the cover of these anti-war marches to actually spread hate. And the swastika is a very good example of it.
So that is one example that has been dealt with, we believe, by the police, according to that statement, out of 200,000 people.
Yeah, but
Ben, would you then ban the Countryside Alliance? Would you ban marches?
I completely agree with you. The right to protest must be protected.
And these people are protesting peacefully.
But in my opinion, having been to a couple of these, there is two-tier policing going on. If you had turned up with the St George's flag on your face and on your shirt, you know, you're more likely to be arrested than if you carry a swastika. And something's gone fundamentally wrong with the way we're behaving as we're not a settled culture anymore. We're multicultures in the United Kingdom, sadly. We haven't got a settled social social construct. We are a nation struggling now to identify what its culture is. And part of the problem there is the police now not knowing how to enforce the law. They come across the St George's flag. It's perfectly valid if you've got St George's flag painted on your face to lock the guy up.
Well, I'm just going to say, I'm so glad you mentioned the two-tier policing thing, because I think we saw it, I personally think we saw it with the BLM marches, where the police were frightened to get involved in case they were accused of racism, and we know they've got issues with racism. And, you know, for example, regardless of what you think of his politics, if someone like Tommy Robinson had turned up with his face painted in the England flag or wearing a swastika draped over his shoulders...
Oh, my goodness.
How do you think the police would have reacted to that, Joe?
Well, I would imagine they would have arrested him. And in fact, he was arrested at one of the marches because he's one of the groups of people that comes in to try and sow yet more division like we need it. I mean, you know, we've had Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, remember her, sharing a platform where...
That was a bit weird.
Tommy Robinson was praised as a hero by Steve Bannon. We've had
Well, I don't think you can...
hang on.
you can't tangentially
Yes, you can.
implicate...
Yes, you can, Ben, because actually you have now got Lee Anderson, who told in an interview with a national newspaper that if people didn't like going on the Bibi Stockholm barge, they could F off. That wasn't a recording.
Well,
he said it in an interview.
I've got some sympathy with Lee on the position.
You might have, but if you have people in senior positions, and at the time he was deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, you've got Hester, who's donated millions to the Conservative Party, who, said appalling things about Diana. It took 48 hours for the government, the Prime Minister, to say that's racist and misogynist.
Well,
and you had ministers going on the television and the radio going...
Jo, we have digressed. I'm glad we've digressed.
I know, but you can't...
I don't digress too much. I mean, basically, the problem is that these marches in our city, people are terrified to come into town, and the police, I'm sorry, but they seem to have lost control.
The police are encouraged. Look, we've got to understand what's going on. Woke isn't a social fad that's just emerged out of the blue. Woke is something that has been actively promoted by government through the regulatory and legal framework in the United Kingdom.
What's to do with this?
Well, I'm coming to it. And part of that is diversity, equality and inclusion. It's a fundamentally erroneous regulation that has now found its way as a virus into every organisation in the United Kingdom, including the police, which requires the police to promote the interests of minorities over and above, and if necessary, to the detriment of the majority. And that's why you are seeing two-tier policing, partly because they're scared, I suspect, because there are 200,000 Palestinian marchers.
Well, they're not Palestinian marchers.
Well, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli, whatever.
War. They're marching against...
Do you disagree there is two-tier policing in this country?
I don't think there is.
You think all marches, all demonstrations are policed entirely
I'm not saying
equally?
that, but we know perfectly well that the Metropolitan Police is institutionally racist, as written large by Dame Louise
absolutely.
By an independent body for which there was no democratic accountability or scrutiny. She writes a report and it becomes absolutely sacrosanct that we can't challenge it. If I were to say the institutions of the United Kingdom used not to be racist, they are now encouraged to practice what I call reverse racism.
You think they used not to be racist?
No. I grew up in this country as a brown individual. My dad's Pakistani, my mum's English. I never have experienced racism against myself from any institution. I've experienced racism from individuals, but never institutional racism.
I find that astonishing,
And
Ben.
now we have regulatory requirement for reverse racism, and that is racist.
You need to right some of the wrongs, and it's not just racism. Look at what happened to Sarah Everard. Look at the fact that Wayne
But
Couzens...
that wasn't racism.
It doesn't matter whether it's racism. In your view,
That was a corrupt
it's woke
police officer
who was allowed to carry
That's not
on.
woke. Him raping a woman is completely unacceptable
but in your
every
view,
level.
that's about... If somebody had said, it's just a bit of office banter, David Carrick was known as the rapist.
No, come on, that's not fair, Joe. You're putting words in my mouth, and then you're conflating those words with something else.
The only people who are using woke as something to be divisive are the right wing, who are saying that anything that tries to make a more decent, tolerant society is wrong.
No, the regulatory framework encourages and embeds division in the United Kingdom. I was going to say in our society, I can't claim that we have a society anymore.
As much as I'm loving this division currently in the studio, because you're both brilliant debaters, I'm running out of time on this one.
Sorry.
So sorry, but you're brilliant.